Hi, I'm Claudia Lala. I'm the producer for When We Return, which is an online art platform conceived during the pandemic times and to promote exchanges, dialogues, and also to connect diverse artistic communities between Canada and Argentina. This platform has been growing and continues to contribute and generate actions and also opportunities to evolve, share experiences, and hopefully build a better future. So our program today is part of a series celebrating Black History and International Women's Month. We are here in conversation with the Power Plant, and we'll talk about the current exhibits and the Power Plant as a site for activism, equality, social and environmental justice, as well as the importance of Black people and women's empowerment, among very other interesting issues. So I'd like to welcome today Muna Cann, Head of Public Program and Outreach for the Power Plant, as well as Noor Alè. She's the curator for Sasha Huber's exhibit, You Name It, and Josephine Denis, who's the TD Curator of Education and Outreach for Sandra Brewster's exhibit, By Way of Communion. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Muna, please, I'll share the floor with you now.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much for the invitation to this amazing project. So I'm Muna Cann. I'm the Head of Public Programs and Outreach at the Power Plant. The Power Plant reopened to the public on February 5th with solo exhibitions by 3 artists, women, Shauna Illingworth, Sasha Huber, and Sandra Brewster. And these 3 global and local women artists that reflect on human relationships and interventions on the land. So it is part of the Power Plant's mandate to present the work of diverse artists to an equally diverse audience and to be an open platform for the exchange of the most pressing issues of our time. And as Head of Public Programs and Outreach, our aim is to encourage visitors to engage and interact with the art and ideas presented within the current exhibitions on show at the Power Plant. We offer a robust calendar of all-year, all-free exhibitions and public programs throughout the year that welcomes all. I wanted to say as well that the Power Plant is never performative with our commitment to diversity. Just take a look at the artists we've exhibited, the makeup of our staff and board members, as well as the audiences and communities we engage with. Our vision for diversity and equity starts from the top down. Director and artistic director Gaetan Berna is the first person of color and woman to be a director at the Power Plant. And her artistic vision for creating an inclusive institution that reaches out to all communities extends throughout the whole team, which is made up of mostly diverse women leaders, as you can see. We strive to build strong relationships with diverse partners and communities. And one of our community outreach initiatives at the Power Plant is the Black Curators Forum. Gaetan co-founded this forum alongside with peers from A Posteriori, the AGO, and the McMaster Museum of Art, with the belief in the role of Black curators as change makers and social innovators. This forum is a knowledge sharing initiative that aims at fostering exchange and social change, highlighting the marginalized, suppressed, and often forgotten contributions of Black art professionals to the field of museum and curatorial work. Throughout the year, we showcase the works of diverse global and Canadian artists. In our Winter 2022 exhibition, 2 exhibitions that we're going to talk about today are You Name It by Sasha Huber and Toronto-based artist Sandra Brewster by Way of Communion, as you said, Claudia. Now let's hear from Associate Curator Noor Alè, and then followed by TD Curator of Education and Outreach Fellow Josephine Denis, who curated. They were both curators of each of the exhibitions. So I'll pass over to you, Noor.
Thank you, Muna, for this very lovely introduction. So I want to begin probably by talking about, the context of feminism, that feminism is something that is intersectional, it's intergenerational, and it draws inspiration from various movements. In the context of Sasha Huber, she is a Swiss, Haitian, Finnish artist who really draws from this very powerful legacy of liberation and struggle that relates to Haiti, right? And its freedom in securing independence from a colonial power. So her work really addresses, histories of freedom, realities of these persisting legacies of colonialism, imperialism, and racism. And as a woman, she is somebody who is profoundly connected to notions of activism. This humanitarian ethos that she embodies is something that really is in true synergy with the power plant. As Muna mentioned, we are an institution that supports artistic practices that not only are they at the forefront of innovation, but they are at the forefront of instigating and provoking dialogues that, make us as viewers and also as colleagues to really question and ponder our positioning in the world and our own biases and the work that we have to do to build a better future collectively. So Sasha's exhibition is entitled You Name It. It gathers a pretty robust body of work that's over 10 years in creation that responds to the Demounting Louis Agassiz campaign. It's a cultural, political, and socially activist campaign that seeks to demount Louis Agassiz. Agassiz was a Swiss-American glaciologist, paleontologist, ichthyologist. He studied fish, and he actually won the Proto Nobel Prize for his work on the Ice Age. So although he was a renowned man of the sciences, he was also a profound white supremacist, somebody who promoted anti-Darwinian theories, somebody who really actively sought to place people of color, particularly Black people and Indigenous peoples of the Americas, and those who were of mixed racial descent as other and as inferior. We see Sasha's respond to this first and foremost by doing reparative interventions in sites across the earth that bear Agassiz's name. On our planet, there are lakes, glaciers, mountains, even the moon and the Mars, and 7 species of animals bear Agassiz's name as a scientific tribute to this man. However, in none of these places are there plaques that contextualize, how much of a segregationist he was, that he really emboldened white supremacists, and that he also commissioned these profoundly dehumanizing portraits of 7 enslaved African men and women on that essentially were enslaved on a plantation in South Carolina. And these portraits were commissioned by Joseph T. Zealy. So Zealy took these photographs under the direction of Agassiz, and Agassiz sought to use photography as a documentary evidence, to position people of color as inferior. So what Sasha ends up doing, she, does reparative interventions in photographic archives. She does them on the land by working alongside sovereignty-seeking Indigenous communities. We see this with Mother Throat. It's a reparative intervention that she did in Autorea. Autorea is the Maori name for New Zealand, with Jeff Mahokia, to cleanse the Agassiz Glacier from these legacies of racism and colonialism. And she also does this in Canada on Algonquin First Nation territory, on Lac Agassiz, which can be found within not too close proximity, about 300 kilometers, I think northwest from Montreal. So she collaborates with Cynthia Pitsuliak and Charlotte Kamanik. They are an Inuit throat singing duo to cleanse this site, again, from these persisting legacies of colonialism, imperialism, and racism. And it has such a profound connection to Canada as well, you know, as a country that, you know, is founded on colonial legacies, on you know, the profound mistreatment of Indigenous peoples. And Sasha's very interested in redressing these histories and bringing them to light, you know, collectively. And in the context of her practice as a woman, I think she's very bold and she's brave and she's inspiring. And I think she sets a fantastic model for all of us, you know, to work collectively and collaboratively, but to also, you know, call attention to these issues. So this activist campaign, the Demounting Louis Agassiz campaign that began in 2007, she does a reparative intervention on the Agassiz peak horn on top of a mountain in Switzerland. And she, you know, installs a plaque at the very top, you know, bringing to light the fact that individuals like Renty and Delia, who were 2 out of those 7 enslaved men and women on the plantation. So what happens to their fate? You know, here we are remembering Agassiz and his contributions, but what about the people who, you know, suffered due to white supremacy? And what is the continuation of that? So in some of the works that we see in the exhibition, there's these posters called Agassiz Down Under that talk about the brutality of anti-Black racism in the States, and really bringing to light, you know, statistics and talking about this, and really kind of almost as if she's carving out a chronology or a lineage, right, between, you know, the history of these plantations, and also how we as humans in the West, particularly Western humans, you know, have also, we need to face these issues, you know, quite, we need to take them head on. We need to work collaboratively to dismantle this and to call attention to where these ideas stem from and where these biases come from in terms of history books, and who often has had the privilege to write history. It's something that's been afforded to, you know, men, particularly white men and men of European origin for the most part, and white women as well too, to be completely frank. So Sasha, as a woman who is Haitian, Swiss, and Finnish, is somebody who is, you know, profoundly dedicated to redressing these histories and bringing them to light to the public. Yeah, and I think she sets a great example for all of us. She's environmentally conscious as well. It's something that she, you know, really strives to do. So it's an honor, I think, for all of us collectively to have had the privilege of getting to know Sasha and working with her. And it's a great activist ethos that matches with the mandate that Muna just mentioned. And I'm going to pass over the mic to my colleague, Josephine, who will talk about Sandra Brewster.
Thank you so much.
Noor, that was beautiful. So for me, what I'd like to start by talking about and sort of bringing forth in this discussion is that often when we talk about feminism and the history of feminism, we start with the movement in academic books, you know, and a lot of times as well, for the history of experiences of Black people diasporically, we often look to academic writing and research. And in that process, by centering academic writing and research and knowledge, we often forget the everyday people that this research and academic knowledge draws from. And what we do at the Power Plant by bringing contemporary living artists to the forefront to sort of engage with their own narratives is that we are reminding our audience and ourselves that we hold the knowledge that matters. And what knowledge that we foster, that we celebrate, that we critically engage with becomes the history that will then be learned and will then be engaged with. And so Noor was talking about legacy, and at the power plant, I think that's one of the things that institutionally we're often confronted with. What is our legacy, and how are we in service of artists and communities that can then, reclaim their own histories, but also be at the forefront of what we preserve culturally and historically. And so for me, movements such as like feminism or Black History Month is really about finding ways to make space for just everyday people to tell their narratives with a language, with a tone, with stories that they can really see themselves with and be proud of. And Sandra Brewster's practice is a beautiful sort of manifestation of those values. So By Way of Communion is a two-part installation exhibition. And the first one is in the Fleck Claire story at the power plant. And it is a site-specific installation titled Dense. And it is a beautiful representation of her practice as a first-generation Canadian who is interested in sort of exploring how you can get a sense of a homeland without ever being there, without ever having lived there, without ever actually being of that place, but being part of a family that's of that place. And then looking at that, she starts looking at, all the women in her family that have sort of conveyed to her stories and a sense of belonging by telling her the experience of being in that homeland. And so through stories of her kin, of her family members, through family pictures, she starts sort of creating landscapes that make her sort of explore and connect with different places that just give her a sense of self. And so for Dense, the way that it is constructed is on the east wall, you have a river, the Essequibo River, that is in Guyana, where her parents are from. And then on the west wall, you have a collage of forests that are both Guyanese forests and Canadian forests that she collaged and sort of inextricably tied together as one landscape. So to be able to create those murals, she uses a sort of signature process now that's called gel transfers. And they're photo-based, and for the first time on the West Wall, drawing-based as well. And to do that, what happens is she aggrandizes a photo or collage on Photoshop on her computer, and then she prints the photo in panels that are quite big. And then she reconstructs the image through these panels on the floor. And then she glues them face down on the wall, adds more glue to the surface, and then that dries overnight. And then she starts the process of rubbing off the paper and the glued paper on the wall with water as hot as your hands can take it. You drench the paper, and then as you're rubbing it off, basically the ink adheres to the wall and you see an image appear. And as Noor can attest, it is really, really hard to describe how determined you have to be to see that image appear. I mean, after 2 minutes of doing this, your arms are sore, you're sort of panicking because you're looking at this 20 feet high and wide image, and you see all of these glued panels and you're like, how am I going to do this? And that sort of determination and passion that it takes to sort of be part of the process of transferring that image onto the wall is very similar to how Cann tries to transfer a sense of belonging, to their children, for example, who have never been to a homeland. It demands of course, determination and passion, but it also demands a sort of gentleness and honesty, and the way that you're telling a story and making sure that your interpretation is what is coming forward in the story that you're telling. I often talk about Sandra as a poet, and the way that every aspect of her work, from the process to the material to the content, always have hints of the meaning of the work. You know, it's quite layered. So, for example, the image on the walls are quite pixelated. And the reason for that is because her practice is image-based, she has to store all of that archive, you know, archive of images that she took, archive of family photos, archive of images that serve as inspiration or as research. And to do that, she sort of has to lower the quality of the image to be able to contain all of that. And one of the questions she asks herself often is, how do we contain all of the places, all of the stories that make us who we are, you know, within? And in the same way that the image that is printed on the paper is blurred, or memories become blurred as well, right? Because you were in this sort of struggle to try and retain as much of, you know, stories and experiences as you can. And so talking about honesty, what happens when the image is transferred onto the wall is, because of that process, all of the materials and the paper and the water, the images that is resulting from the gel transfer process is creased. You know, there are holes in it because not all of the ink has adhered, and you have tears. And because of that, you see that the pristine image that was printed on paper is not the same image that you get once it's been transferred. And it's not that it's less of an image, it's actually an image with more textures and, you know, marks of the story of how that image was created. And that's really fascinating, because that's what happens in oral history as well. You know, you get gaps and you get transformation of the story, because you have different people's interpretation and people's desires to connect with that story, or to a homeland, or to a landscape, and a way that they tell the story to be able to impart that desire onto others. And so again, you know, we were talking about academia and everyday people. What happens with storytelling as a knowledge making practice is that you realize that what matters in the knowledge that is being preserved is the decision, the communal decision of what we should preserve as a collective, to be able to move forth with the values and principles that we hold dear. And what happens with that is that when you're a person telling the story, it is very obvious that you are the holder of that knowledge. And your capability to tell the story is really also an expression of how much you know. And during our Sunday Scene, which is a program that we do tied to each exhibition, where we invite different guests to come to the power plant and sort of expand our perspective on the work ourselves by telling us their own understanding, we had a guest called Nihal El Hadi, who's a writer, a researcher, and an artist, talk about Sandra's work as a secret making practice. It is so layered that someone has to tell you about it to really understand it, you know? And at the same time, there's so many hints in it, you know. For a Guyanese person that comes to the power plant, they might see the Essequibo River and automatically recognize it, but that's not going to be the case for each person. But at the same time, in the same way that you're deciding to tell the story, you are deciding to who to tell the story to and how much to tell. And that in itself is a secret. You know, oral history is very much about that ability to tell our own stories outside of bureaucratic documentation. And one thing I should mention is on both walls, you have this brown acrylic wash that sort of colors the black and white image in different spots. On the Essequibo River, it's the actual river that's colored brown. And that's the actual color of the river in Guyana. And the reason for that is because there's silt, sediment, and sand and fallen leaves running underneath the surface. And because of that, you can't really see through the water. And that lends itself well to myths, you know, and mystery and the type of storytelling that Guyanese people themselves have created throughout history. And for Sandra, it lends itself well to representing the experience of being an immigrant and of moving from one place to another in the hopes of having, you know, a more yielding life, but not really being certain of what's waiting for you at the other end. And at the same time, for the Black community, a practice of survival and of celebration that we've sort of fostered throughout the years is opacity, which is a concept that was sort of brought to me, at least through this writer called Fred Moten. If you don't know Fred Moten, please read anything about him because he's just this really brilliant writer. And basically he talks about the ways in which the Black community intentionally obscures itself as a way to create a barrier that actually gives us space to be intimate, to figure out for ourselves who we are, to figure out what our language is, you know, to figure out how we move and how we belong in a way that distances itself from all of the oppressive system that we are constantly resisting as part of our life on lands that we never belonged to, you know, because of the transatlantic slave trade. And so because of this opacity, once again, Sandra is sort of hinting at the ways in which, you know, her own language, her own visual language is not meant to be obvious to everyone. You know, it is really a message to specific people. And at the same time, she's inviting all of us to interpret her imagery for ourselves. You know, what type of memories do you hold dear from your kin and from your family? How does that sort of inform the way that you connect to different places, to other people? And that's really at the core of her work. A lot of people that come to the power plant will look at this installation and say, oh, it's curious, you know, she usually does figure-based wall transfers, you know, of her family, of her friends. And they ask, why aren't there people in that installation? But actually, as you're walking through this passage towards the water, you yourself become the figures in that landscape. And you have to sort of recognize and embrace the fact that you are an embodied archive. An archive of all of your ancestors have passed down to you, an archive of the ways that you sort of remember the joy, the celebration, the strength, and also the trauma of what has happened historically for you to be here today. And that's a very powerful experience, especially within the Black community, for all that we've survived to be here today. And then to end, I will just talk quickly about the second installation, which is called A Place to Put Your Things. And that installation is just such a beautiful public artwork that's on the Canada Square of the Harbourfront Center, on which the power plant is located, and it is facing the water. It is a swing, a playground swing, and the swing itself is in the shape of two figures donning afros, embracing and kissing each other. And you can actually sit within that embrace and just feel the love and swing at your own pace and rhythm, which is what Sandra wanted as, you know, a way of looking at how movement and rhythm can be a soothing and healing practice, let's say. So the way that she came to this installation is that she was at Alice Yard, which is an artist residency in Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the co-founders, Christopher Cozier, encouraged her to go to Suriname to go see this this local artist residency that was happening there, where local artists were being invited to respond to the war of the civil war that happened there from 86 to 92, and to give people places to sort of heal through art, through engagement with art. And she was thinking about doing a swing for kids and for adults to just recall their inner child and have, you know, a place to sort of unburden themselves. And so she came with this idea of the swing, and it didn't happen there, but then she came to the power plant and asked us, as she was doing dance, to also install a place to put your things. And the way that she came about that name is that she went to a friend's house, and that friend told her, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I don't have a place to put your things." And for her, that expression was a beautiful sort of description of wanting to offer people a safe place to sort of, you know, take down any sort of baggage that you have to carry, but don't feel that you feel the weight of, and being able to sort of lighten up yourself. And finally, the last thing I'll say is that the figures that you see that are donning afros are actually part of a series that she started in 2004 that were called the Smith series. And then she changed that name to the Mohammed series when she was in Suriname and in Trinidad and Tobago. And basically the reason why she called it the Smith series is that it was a reference to the phone book in Canada, where basically the Smith name is the biggest section of the book. And she was sort of cheekily mocking this idea that because you have a name doesn't mean that you're all the same. Not all Smiths are the same, not all Black people are the same. And at the same time, for her, doing those figures in this sort of figure in line with no features is also, you know, claiming that anonymity of being Black as this sort of very general label, this very general name, but that also gives us the power to sort of recreate ourselves and figure out for ourselves who we want to be and how we want to claim that. And to have two Black people, you know, in an embrace, showing love and kissing in a public space and being part of that is just such a beautiful, beautiful and necessary experience right now, especially. So yes, that is it.
Thank you so very much. Both of you, actually, you know, while both of you were telling the stories and explaining the curatorial aspects of both exhibits, you know, just made me feel that passion and, you know, such a lot of power. And it was amazing. So thank you both for the beautiful, detailed explanation. I mean, it couldn't have been better. I mean, both of you just made me feel, you know, the power of culture, you know, how through in each of the explanation of both artists and you as curators went through every step of, you know, basically how decolonization has become a word thanks to art. You know, I mean, I don't recall ever, yes, you know, of course it was a word that existed before, but how art and exhibits and artists have been able to actually put this in the community's mind, you know, like how that idea of, you know, rewriting history through art, what a magnificent tool, you know, we all have in our hands, and how powerful it is. And I mean, I'm blessed just to be able to do this job and And I am sure you guys feel the same. So anyway, I just have one question for both curators. Maybe, I mean, you've explained so much that probably the answer is within that, but I just thought, while you were retelling as detailed as you were each of the curatorial process, I was wondering what was like the key thing to consider when curating these artists. Noor, if you want first, and Josephine.
I think for me as a curator, when you're working with one artist, which is a very different experience than curating a group show, you really have to be of support of that artist. And for Sandra, installing the exhibition was creating the work. And in that process, I feel like it's a very challenging feat and challenge that she set for herself, because there's never really any guarantee of what the actual final result is going to look like. And so my job was to really be of support, to believe in her, and to make sure that the way that we were contextualizing the show was true, not only to her intention, but to how important it would be for the viewers and the public to engage with the work. And to have that sort of purpose and vision was just a very constant way of sort of approaching the work as it was being made, and taking part in the actual making of the work was really crucial to my understanding of the work as well, because it is such a physical and visceral experience that's one of the things that I will be most grateful for, and that will carry for the rest of my life. We were, Sandra and I would be at the power plant until 11 p.m. just blasting Nina Simone and screaming the words and just trying to find the strength to continue to rub it off, to rub the paper off. So just knowing that we had that determination to see the work happen and to make sure that it was contextualized correctly in a meaningful and generative way were, for me, the purpose curatorially of my work.
Sorry to interrupt. I think what you've said, Josephine, is lovely and beautiful, and it's a process that you have lived with Sandra, and I think it gives also a different layer to see how this work is going to fade away, like what's going to happen with that work, right? Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Sure. Thank you for reminding me about that aspect of the work. So because it's a site-specific installation, and at the end of the show, that work will disappear in some way, to some extent. We're going to send it away and we're going to paint over it. But as Nihal El Hadi was talking about Sandra having this secret making practice, actually the people that have experienced the work for themselves during the exhibition, whenever they come back to the power plant, will know that this work existed there and that there's still traces of it that are left in the institution. And for Sandra, working directly on the walls of institution is a really important aspect of her work. So thank you, Muna, because it's really about making sure that she is inserting her community into these institutions that historically haven't included Black people. And to know that we are there, whether it is visible or invisible to some people, there is this common knowledge that we marked institutions and that we are now part of, their architecture. So yeah.
Thank you, Josephine.
Thank you, Josephine. That was really very, very interesting and beautifully told. Noor, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that, the key thing?
Yes, of course. So in the context of Sasha, we installed during the pandemic. So trust was very important it was a key ingredient to this, because I didn't have the opportunity to have the artists on site and to really kind of see how they envision the exhibition unfolding in the physical space instead of a 3D rendering of the exhibition. So while we work together, curatorial labor is one of care and one of selflessness. The term curator comes from the Latin curare, which means to take care of. But truly, sometimes the role of the curator has been one that's been almost often positioned as an apolitical caretaker of collections, right? Instead of one that is there to support an artist and their vision. And this is their project at the end of the day, not so much the curator plays a role in contextualizing it, like Josephine mentioned, and supporting them on site to realize this. But with Sasha, it was very important for us and for myself as the curator on that project to realize her vision at the best of our ability, despite the distances, her in Helsinki and me in Toronto, Canada. So we did a lot of, Skype, Zoom sessions to say, okay, how do you feel about this? What do you think about the lighting? Can we move these works? What do you think, Sasha? So always, referencing the artist and what they want and what they envision, and providing support when there is an opportunity to provide, an alternative solution or perhaps another way of installing the works. But one of the most beautiful things that we did together was conceptualize the show together in terms of creating this thematic thread that connected the work. So beginning with the history of photography and its violence as a colonial apparatus, but also the way that it can be reclaimed and renegotiated as a tool of agency, which is what she does with Tailoring Freedom, a work in which we see Renti and Delia side by side. He was a Congolese father and a daughter living on a plantation, and they were the subject of these very dehumanizing portraits that Agassiz commissioned. So Sasha uses the staple gun and dresses them in these marvelous, in a dress inspired by Harriet Tubman and a suit inspired by Frederick Douglass. They were both, famed abolitionists and activists as well. So really kind of centering that history first and foremost, the one of photography, but the one of its renegotiation and its history, and then carving out this path to talk about Renti and her site-specific reparative interventions, talking about present day today in terms of violences that we see in the West, particularly in the United States and in North America, and then continuing on to talk about her interventions in Brazil, in Scotland, in New Zealand, in Canada, and then creating a room, 2 rooms dedicated to interventions on Lac Agassiz and Algonquin First Nation, and another work that's entitled Space Race. It's a multimedia installation that talks about this colonial pursuit to claim the moon for itself, that references these Cold War ambitions between the United States and the Soviet Union to race to claim the moon for themselves first. But of course, there's craters and glaciers in the moon that are named after Agassiz, which is what Sasha's really getting to. So again, it was a different way of working, but it's interesting, working remotely, and she trusted me so much, and I'm really tremendously grateful for that, because trust needs to be built, Thank you.
Thank you both. I have known Gaetan Berna as the director of the power plant, and working to develop that space, to be brave and lead in the new thinking, especially promoting international artists and put them in the Toronto radar. So I was wondering, Mona, how you as a head of programming, how do you present, how do you deal and present the voice of the power plant through these exhibits?
Thank you, Claudia. It's a very good question, and we as a team are working towards new strategies of outreach as well, and how to communicate and have a word out there as well with different diverse communities. We have different programs coming as well. For instance, for these exhibitions, we're going to have a closing week, and we're trying also to come up with a screening of Free Renty, which is a documentary that was built, and I'm sure Noor could speak better about it, but we want to also show that part, that voice of Tamara, which is a parent of Renty, and has also wanted to bring back her legacy, because these daguerreotypes are in Harvard. So maybe Noor, you can jump in, but we want to also hear these voices that are still today and very loud and clear.
So I'll chime in for a little bit here to talk about the Renty versus Lanier film. So Tamara Lanier is one of the descendants of Renty and Delia, and she essentially launched a lawsuit against Harvard University. These daguerreotypes of the 7 enslaved men and women, there's 15 daguerreotypes in total, different poses, all, none of these images were taken with their consent. They're very dehumanizing. And Harvard has essentially, position these images as like posters for, symposia, in publications, as advertisements, really circulating them out into the open. And for Tamara, from her perspective, these photographs shouldn't be treated this way, because even in the afterlife, Renty and Delia were not able to experience freedom, but even in the afterlife, from the plantation, right, to the museum, it connects these legacies, right, of colonialism and how they are treated essentially like objects, to profit from for the university's intellectual pursuits, to present themselves in a better light. So Tamara launched a lawsuit, and Sasha, one of the works in the exhibition, pictures of, I think it's pictures of freedom. I can find the title, but essentially it's a documentary, a work that films the 43 descendants of Agassiz, and Tamara Lanier having a press conference, asking for these photographs to be returned, these daguerreotypes to be returned to Tamara Lanier. So this film really brings to light, these connections, right, between the plantations, the history of the transatlantic slave trade, but also how museums themselves, have this inability or refusal, denial, to return objects that belong to individuals. And this is also something that we see here in Canada too, in First Nations, like in museums in BC, where these are ancestral objects that need to be returned to a community. And in fact, they're not returned, and the museum continues to profit, and continues to keep them in their collection for safeguarding purposes and so forth. So the film gets to the heart of this and really kind of takes us on this journey to explore these issues a little bit deeper.
And if I can add really quickly, so I am the curator of the Sandra Brewster show, but I am also under Muna's leadership, just working on public programs at the power plant. And I think one of the ways that we are sort of encouraging engagement with the exhibitions on display is that we are trying to always give an array of public programs that sort of offer different entryways into the works. And so sometimes we have people presenting on the work and sort of expanding on their understanding and their relationship to the work. Sometimes we have writing workshops with visual prompts that are actually the work of the artist, and writers get to really engage with the work by discovering it, but also using it as inspiration. We have sort of gatherings of makers and Shauna Illingworth's exhibition where people get to discuss the different thematics of the work. And so we're really using these three artists, these three women artists, interest and research as pillars for the season's conversations and for the institution's way of trying to make sure that conversations that are urgent and pertinent to us right now as a society are being brought forth, and that the public also gets a chance to sort of manifest and express through public programs what their own needs and interests are.
Okay. Thank you so very, very much. It has been a pleasure. It has been encouraging. It has been powerful. I think we touched so many interesting issues. So on my side, I just have to thank three of you and the Power Plant and Cann for giving us also the opportunity to meet. And I hope to see you in person soon, and keep up the great work. Thank you. Thank you for what you're offering in the community. And I hope that your exhibits get to travel and show the world the amazing work that the Power Plant is doing. Thank you all.
Thank you, Claudia. I would like just to end with an invitation to join our exhibitions. And for the latest updates on our free exhibitions and programs, you can also visit our website, thepowerplant.org, and subscribe to our social medias, our newsletter. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And welcome to our gallery. We're open now, so we're very happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.